I need to tell you about the night I got fired for refusing to serve a drink to someone who, 3 months later, would be arrested for crimes that made national headlines. Everyone thinks I'm some kind of hero now, but the truth is messier than that. I didn't refuse to serve him because I knew what he was capable of. I refused because I was tired of being treated like garbage by people who thought their fame gave them the right to dehumanize others. The question that keeps me awake at night isn't whether I made the right choice, but whether making the right choice for the wrong reasons still counts as doing good. Let me paint you a picture of who I was 6 months ago. 28 years old, working double shifts at Belmont, one of those overpriced downtown restaurants where celebrities go to be seen. The kind of place where a glass of wine costs more than my grocery budget for a week, but the tips made it worthwhile. I'd been there for 3 years, working my way up from busser to server to eventually training new staff. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid my bills and helped me save for culinary school. I had dreams of opening my own place someday, somewhere unpretentious where good food mattered more than who was eating it. My childhood had taught me to keep my head down and work hard. My parents immigrated from El Salvador when I was 5, and they cleaned office buildings for 20 years to give me opportunities they never had. Mijo, my father would say, dignity isn't about what job you do, it's about how you do it. That philosophy served me well in the service industry, where maintaining your self-respect while dealing with entitled customers is an art form you either master or let destroy you. I'd served plenty of celebrities over the years. Most were decent enough, tired, wanting to eat in peace. Some were demanding but professional about it. A few were complete nightmares, but I learned to smile, take their abuse, and pocket their usually generous guilt tips. It was part of the job, or so I told myself. The money was good, and I was building towards something better. My coworkers became like family. There was Emma, 19, and working her way through community college, always brightening the room with terrible jokes. Carlos, the sous chef, who'd slip me extra food when he thought I wasn't eating enough. And Diana, our veteran server who'd been in the industry for 15 years and could handle any difficult customer with surgical precision. We looked out for each other in the way service workers do, covering shifts, sharing tips with whoever was struggling, creating a bubble of humanity in an often dehumanizing environment. It was a Thursday in February, around 9 p.m. The dinner rush was winding down, and I was looking forward to closing early for once. That's when Vincent Blackwood walked in with his usual entourage, the guy from those action movies who was always posting about his charity work on social media. 6'2", perfectly styled hair, wearing a suit that probably cost more than I made in 3 months. My manager, David, practically levitated across the floor to greet them personally. He pulled me aside as they were being seated at our best table. VIP treatment, he whispered, his eyes gleaming with the kind of desperation that comes from owing your boss more than you can afford to lose. Whatever they want, however they want it. Blackwood's got connections with the owner. I should have known something was off from the moment they sat down. Blackwood's public persona was all charm and humanitarian causes. He'd just done a big campaign about treating service workers with respect. But the man who slumped into that chair was nothing like his Instagram posts. He was already drunk, reeking of alcohol and expensive cologne, eyes glassy and unfocused. From the first interaction, he was different from his public image. He snapped his fingers at me like I was a dog, interrupted me mid-sentence when I tried to explain the specials, and made crude comments about the female servers loud enough for half the dining room to hear. When I brought their appetizers, he grabbed my wrist, hard enough to leave marks, and leaned in close. "This better not have any of that ethnic shit in it," he said, his breath hot against my face. "I don't eat food made by your people." I felt my face burn with shame and anger. Your people. Like he could tell just by looking at me where my family came from, like it mattered, like it made me less than human. But I smiled, that practiced service industry smile that hides everything, said, "Of course, sir," and walked away. I needed this job. I had rent due, school applications pending, dreams that required financial stability. The breaking point came an hour later. Blackwood had been drinking steadily, shots of top-shelf tequila followed by wine with dinner, then more shots. His voice got louder, his comments cruder. He started rating the female servers on their fuckability, while his friends laughed like trained seals. The other diners were starting to look uncomfortable, conversations dying at nearby tables. When Emma walked by carrying a tray of drinks, he reached out and grabbed her hip, pulling her toward him with enough force that she nearly dropped everything. She was just a kid, 19, working to pay for school, trusting that her workplace would protect her. "Hey, sweetheart," he slurred, his hand moving lower. "How about you ditch this dump and come party with some real men?" Emma's face went white. She tried to step back, but his grip tightened. That's when something inside me snapped, not gradually, but all at once, like a dam bursting. "Sir, please don't touch the staff," I said, stepping forward with my heart hammering against my ribs. He looked at me like I'd just crawled out of a sewer. "Excuse me? Did the help just tell me what to do?" "I'm asking you to respect our employees, sir." The dining room went quiet. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Even the kitchen noise seemed to fade. Blackwood stood up, swaying slightly, his face flushed with alcohol and rage. "Do you know who I am?" he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "I could buy this shithole restaurant and fire every single one of you wetbacks before dessert arrives." The slur hit me like a physical blow. I saw Emma's tears, Carlos's face through the kitchen window twisted with helpless anger, Diana's hand covering her mouth in shock. I saw the other customers, some looking away in embarrassment, others pulling out their phones to record what they sensed was about to become a scene. And I made a choice that would change everything. "I know exactly who you are," I said, my voice steady despite my racing heart. "You're a customer who's had too much to drink and forgotten how to treat people with basic human decency. I'm going to have to ask you to leave." His face went purple. "You can't throw me out. I'm Vincent fucking Blackwood. I can refuse service to anyone who's abusive to staff. That's the law." He lunged toward me, stumbling slightly. "You little piece of shit. I'll destroy you. I'll destroy this whole place. Do you have any idea what I can do to your life?" David appeared like magic, practically teleporting from across the restaurant. "Antonio, please, there's been a misunderstanding." "No misunderstanding," I said, not taking my eyes off Blackwood. "He needs to leave. Now." "Antonio, go take a break," David said, his voice tight with panic. "Mr. Blackwood, please, let me handle this. Your employee just assaulted me." Blackwood shouted, though we both knew that was a lie. "I want him fired. I want him arrested." David's face crumpled. I could see the calculations running behind his eyes, the value of Blackwood's business, the owner's reaction, his own job security. When he looked at me, I already knew what was coming. "Antonio, you're done for tonight. Come see me tomorrow." I didn't come in the next day. I knew what David would tell me, and I wasn't ready to hear it. Instead, I spent the morning in my apartment, alternating between fury and fear. I'd worked at Belmont for 3 years, built relationships, earned respect. And one night, I'd thrown it all away for a principle that suddenly felt abstract and useless. My phone buzzed constantly. Emma texting to ask if I was okay. Diana calling to tell me what happened after I left. Blackwood and his group stayed another hour, running up a massive tab and leaving no tip. Carlos from the kitchen sending me a simple message. "You did right, Hermano." When I finally dragged myself to Belmont the next afternoon, David's office felt like a funeral parlor. He couldn't meet my eyes as he slid a final paycheck across his desk. "I'm sorry, Antonio. I really am. But Blackwood's threatening to pull his business, and he's connected to some big investors. The owner's panicking. So you're firing me for protecting a 19-year-old girl from sexual harassment? I'm firing you for refusing to serve a customer and creating a public scene." His voice was hollow, like he was reading from a script. "It's insubordination. That customer was drunk, abusive, and groping my coworker. That's not how the incident report reads." I felt something cold settle in my stomach. "What incident report?" David pulled out a piece of paper. "According to this, Mr. Blackwood made a friendly comment to Emma, and you became aggressive and confrontational without provocation. Emma corroborated that Mr. Blackwood was simply being social." My mouth fell open. That's not what happened. Emma was terrified. "Emma needs this job, Antonio. She's got student loans, rent to pay. She can't afford to make enemies of important customers." I understood then. They'd gotten to her, pressured a 19-year-old girl into changing her story to protect their business interests. The rage that had simmered since last night exploded into something white-hot and consuming. "You're all cowards," I said, standing up. "Every single one of you. Antonio, please don't make this harder than it has to be." "Harder for who?" "You've already made your choice. You chose money over decency, profit over protecting your employees. I hope it was worth it." I walked out of that office knowing I'd never work in fine dining again, not in this city, not with the kind of reference I'd get from Belmont. Blackwood's threat to destroy my life was already coming true, and he probably didn't even remember making it. The next 3 months were the hardest of my adult life. Word spread quickly through the restaurant community, not the truth, but David's version. I was the server who'd gone crazy and attacked a customer for no reason. The server who couldn't handle working with celebrities. The liability no one wanted to hire. I burned through my savings paying rent while working at a series of progressively worse jobs. A diner in the suburbs where the tips barely covered gas money. A sports bar where the customers were drunk and grabby, but at least honest about it. A catering company that paid cash under the table and asked no questions about references. My parents noticed the change immediately. I'd always been their success story, the son who was going to culinary school, who had dreams and plans. Suddenly, I was avoiding their calls, showing up to family dinners with dark circles under my eyes and a defeated slump to my shoulders. Mijo, what happened? My mother asked one Sunday, cornering me in her kitchen while I picked at her homemade pupusas. You look like someone died. I wanted to tell her everything, but how do you explain that you'd sacrificed your career for a principal? How do you admit that doing the right thing had cost you everything you'd worked for? Instead, I mumbled something about restaurant cutbacks and changed the subject. The worst part wasn't the financial stress or even the damaged reputation. It was the doubt that crept in during the long, sleepless nights. Had I overreacted? Could I have handled it differently? Blackwood was drunk and obnoxious, but lots of customers were drunk and obnoxious. Was I just tired of taking abuse, looking for an excuse to finally push back? Did I destroy my life for my ego instead of my principles? I started avoiding the downtown area entirely. Too many reminders of what I'd lost, too many former coworkers who'd cross the street rather than have an awkward conversation. I felt like a ghost haunting my own life, invisible to the world that had once seen me as capable and valuable. 3 months after that night at Belmont, I was working a double shift at Romano's, a chain restaurant in the suburbs where the uniform was polyester and the customers thought a 15% tip was generous. I was refilling ketchup bottles during the slow afternoon lull when Emma appeared at the hostess station. She looked different. Thinner, with dark circles under her eyes and a haunted expression I recognized from my own mirror. When she saw me, she started crying. Antonio, I'm so sorry, she said, her voice breaking. I'm so fucking sorry. I led her to a corner booth, away from curious eyes and ears. She was shaking, her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee she wasn't drinking. Emma, what's going on? What are you sorry for? The incident report. What I told David. It was all lies. The words poured out of her like poison she'd been holding in. After you left that night, David and Mr. Blackwood cornered me in the break room. They said if I didn't change my story, they'd make sure I never worked in food service again. They said Blackwood had connections with the immigration department, that they'd look into my family status. My blood turned ice. Emma's parents were undocumented. Everyone at the restaurant knew. But it was an unspoken understanding that we protected each other. Using that against her was unconscionable. They made me sign a statement saying Blackwood was just being friendly, that you misunderstood and became aggressive. I was so scared, Antonio. I couldn't lose my job, couldn't risk my family getting deported. But what I did to you. Emma, stop. You were 19 years old being threatened by powerful men. You did what you had to do to survive. But you lost everything because of me. I lost everything because I chose to confront a rich asshole who thought he could treat people like property. That's not your fault. She was quiet for a long moment, staring into her coffee. Then she looked up with an expression I couldn't quite read. Antonio, there's something else. Something I found out yesterday that changes everything. She pulled out her phone, scrolled to a news article, and slid it across the table. The headline made my heart stop. Action star Vincent Blackwood arrested in multi-state child trafficking ring. I read the article twice, then a third time, not believing what I was seeing. Federal agents had raided Blackwood's home and offices, arresting him along with 6 other men involved in what prosecutors called a sophisticated network of child exploitation and trafficking. The investigation had been ongoing for 2 years, with evidence including financial records, communications, and testimony from multiple victims. But the detail that made my hands shake was buried in the 3rd paragraph. Agents seized evidence suggesting the ring targeted vulnerable children, many from undocumented immigrant families who were unlikely to report crimes to authorities. I looked up at Emma, who was watching my face with a mixture of relief and revulsion. There's more, she said quietly. I talked to Detective Rodriguez yesterday. She's leading the investigation. Blackwood had been using his celebrity status to identify potential victims. He'd frequent restaurants, bars, places where he could observe staff and customers. He was particularly interested in places that employed young people from immigrant families. The room started spinning. Emma, what are you saying? I'm saying that night, when he was asking me personal questions, touching me, talking about partying, he wasn't just being a creep. He was hunting. Her voice dropped to a whisper. The detective thinks he was trying to recruit me. I drove home from Romano's in a daze, Emma's words echoing in my head. By the time I reached my apartment, the full implications had hit me like a freight train. I hadn't just stood up to a rude customer. I potentially saved a girl from being trafficked. But that realization brought no satisfaction, only a crushing sense of vertigo. I'd made my choice for the right reasons, protecting Emma from harassment, defending basic human dignity. The fact that Blackwood turned out to be a monster was pure chance. If I'd known what he was really up to, would I have acted differently? Would I have been braver? Or would I have been too terrified to act at all? I called in sick to Romano's and spent the next 3 days reading everything I could find about the case. The details were horrific. Dozens of victims, some as young as 13. Blackwood and his associates had been operating for years, using wealth and influence to prey on vulnerable children and intimidate anyone who might speak out. The more I read, the more I understood how close Emma had come to disaster. She fit Blackwood's target profile perfectly. Young, financially desperate, from an undocumented family, working in a service job where she was trained to please customers and avoid confrontation. If I hadn't intervened that night, if she'd gone along with his invitation to party, she might have become another statistic in a federal case file. But I also couldn't escape the darker implications. How many other Emmas were out there? How many servers and bartenders and hotel clerks had Blackwood approached over the years? How many had said yes to his invitations because they couldn't afford to say no, because they'd been taught that customer satisfaction was more important than personal safety? Within a week of Blackwood's arrest, someone had leaked the story of our confrontation at Belmont. Suddenly, I was the hero server who stood up to Predator. My phone rang constantly with interview requests. Reporters camped outside my apartment building. The story was irresistible. Working-class immigrant fights back against wealthy celebrity who turns out to be a child trafficker. But the media narrative felt as false as David's incident report. They wanted to paint me as someone who'd sensed Blackwood's true nature, who'd acted with prescient heroism. The truth, that I'd simply reached my breaking point with an abusive customer, was too mundane for the story they wanted to tell. David called me for the first time since I'd been fired. His voice was shaky, desperate. "Antonio, listen, there's been a misunderstanding. We'd love to have you back at Belmont. Full reinstatement, back pay, a promotion even. The owner's very sorry about the whole situation." "You mean he's very sorry he got caught protecting a child trafficker? That's not fair. We had no idea what Blackwood was really. You knew he was a predator. You saw him groping Emma. You just didn't care because his money was more important than her safety." "Antonio, please. The media is painting us as complicit. We need to show that we support our employees, that we did the right thing." I hung up on him. The interview requests kept coming. 60 Minutes, CNN, The Today Show. Everyone wanted to hear from the server who'd seen through Blackwood's facade. But I turned them all down except for one, a local investigative reporter named Lisa Vang who'd been following the trafficking case from the beginning. "I need people to understand," I told her during our hour-long interview. "I didn't know Blackwood was a trafficker. I didn't have some special insight into his character. I just got tired of watching him treat people like garbage. The fact that he turned out to be a monster doesn't make me psychic. It makes me lucky. But your actions potentially saved Emma from being victimized. My actions were about basic dignity, not heroic intuition. If we're going to prevent more victims, we need to understand that predators hide in plain sight. They don't wear signs. They look like successful, charming celebrities who donate to charity and smile for cameras. The only way to stop them is to create environments where their behavior isn't tolerated, where victims feel safe to speak up." The hardest conversation came 2 weeks after the interview aired. I was sitting in my childhood bedroom, looking at culinary school brochures that suddenly seemed achievable again. The media attention had brought job offers, scholarship opportunities, a future I'd thought was lost forever. My father knocked and entered without waiting for permission, the way he had when I was 15 and in trouble. "Mijo, I saw the interview. I'm proud of you. Papa, I need to tell you something. The night I got fired, I didn't do it because I knew he was dangerous. I did it because I was angry, tired of being treated like shit. I got lucky that he turned out to be a monster." My father sat heavily on the bed beside me. "You think that makes you less of a hero? I think it makes me human instead of heroic. There's a difference. Antonio, let me tell you something. I've been cleaning offices for 20 years. You know how many times I've been called names, treated like furniture, had people assume I'm stupid because I have an accent? Hundreds. Thousands, maybe." I'd never heard him talk about this before. My parents had always presented their work as dignified, necessary, nothing to be ashamed of. Every night, I wanted to fight back, to tell those people what I really thought of them. But I couldn't risk it. I had a family to feed, bills to pay. So I smiled and emptied their trash and let them treat me like I was invisible. He was quiet for a moment, staring at his hands that were scarred from years of hard labor, that had worked double shifts to pay for my school clothes and soccer equipment. The night you stood up to that man, you weren't just protecting Emma. You were standing up for every person who's ever been treated like they don't matter because they serve other people. You were standing up for me, for your mother, for everyone who's ever had to smile while someone powerful made them feel small. But Papa, what if I'd been wrong? What if he'd just been drunk and obnoxious, and I'd ruined my career for nothing? Then you would have ruined your career for dignity, for the principle that all people deserve respect, regardless of how much money they have or how famous they are. That's not nothing, Mijo. That's everything. It's been 6 months since Blackwood's arrest, 3 months since his conviction and sentencing. He got 30 years in federal prison. The judge called him a predator who used his privilege and status to exploit the most vulnerable members of our society. Emma's doing better now. She's back in school, studying social work with a focus on helping trafficking victims. We still talk sometimes, not about that night, but about normal things. Movies, her classes, her terrible dating life. She's stronger than she knows, and I think she's finally starting to believe that. Belmont closed down 2 months ago. The scandal was too much to overcome, especially when it came out that Blackwood wasn't their only problematic VIP customer. David's managing a chain restaurant in Phoenix now. I heard he's actually a decent boss when he's not protecting predators. I never did go back to fine dining. Instead, I used the scholarship money and media attention to open a small catering business focused on authentic Latin American cuisine. It's not glamorous. Most of my clients are community centers, small weddings, quinceañera parties. But the work feels honest in a way that serving overpriced fusion food to celebrities never did. The strangest part is how the media attention changed people's perception of that night. Suddenly, everyone wants to claim they would have done the same thing. Friends who hadn't spoken to me in years reached out to say they'd always known I was brave. Former customers from Belmont told reporters they'd witnessed the incident and always thought I was a hero. But I remember who actually stood with me that night, Carlos in the kitchen, who risked his own job to nod approval when I made my choice. Diana, who quit Belmont a week after I was fired and told me she was ashamed it took her so long. Emma, who was just 19 years old but found the courage to seek me out and tell me the truth, even though it meant admitting she'd lied. Those are my heroes. Not the Monday morning quarterbacks who claimed they would have acted differently, but the people who actually showed up when it mattered. Here's what I know now that I didn't know 6 months ago. Doing the right thing doesn't guarantee the right outcome. Sometimes you stand up for your principles and get fired for it. Sometimes you stand up for your principles and accidentally save someone from a predator. The outcome doesn't determine the morality of the choice. Your reasons do. I didn't refuse to serve Blackwood because I sensed he was dangerous. I refused because I was tired of watching powerful people treat others as less than human. The fact that my choice had consequences I never could have imagined doesn't make it more or less right. It just makes it complicated. We live in a world where people want clear narratives, heroes and villains, good choices and bad ones, actions that are obviously right or obviously wrong. But most of life exists in the gray areas between those extremes. Most of the time, we're making choices based on incomplete information, acting on principles we hope are sound, trying to do right by people we care about without knowing how the story ends. The night I got fired from Belmont, I thought I was choosing between my job and my dignity. I thought I was making a statement about how service workers deserve to be treated. I had no way of knowing I was also choosing between my career and a girl's safety, between financial security and human trafficking. If I'd known the stakes were that high, would I have acted differently? Would I have been braver? Or would the weight of responsibility have paralyzed me? I'll never know, and that uncertainty is something I have to live with. What I do know is this: we don't get to choose our tests or know their true significance until long after we've passed or failed them. All we can do is try to live according to principles that would make us proud if we knew the whole story. All we can do is treat each interaction as if it matters, because we never know when it might matter more than we can imagine. Blackwood's victims are getting the help they need. Emma's safe and building a life dedicated to helping others. The trafficking ring has been dismantled. Justice, in its slow and imperfect way, has been served. And me? I'm still processing what it means to be called a hero for doing something that felt, in the moment, like basic human decency. I'm still figuring out how to live with the knowledge that my worst night led to someone else's salvation. I think about that night often, not the parts the media focused on, but the smaller moments. The way Emma's face crumpled when Blackwood touched her. The silence in the dining room when I made my choice. The feeling of walking away from everything I'd worked for, not knowing if I'd ever get it back. I think about all the other Blackwoods out there, using their power to prey on vulnerable people. I think about all the Emmas, young and scared and trying to survive in a world that treats them as disposable. I think about all the moments when someone has to choose between safety and dignity, between keeping quiet and speaking up. Most of all, I think about the question that keeps me awake some nights. If I hadn't been pushed to my breaking point that evening, if Black would have been just obnoxious enough to be tolerable, would Emma have left with him? Would she have become another victim because I chose to stay silent and keep my job? It's a question I'll never be able to answer, and maybe that's the point. Maybe the real lesson isn't about having perfect foresight or making choices for perfect reasons. Maybe it's about creating a world where standing up for basic human dignity is normal instead of heroic. Where protecting vulnerable people is everyone's responsibility instead of a burden that falls on whoever happens to be brave enough or angry enough or desperate enough to act. I don't know if that makes me a hero or just someone who got lucky while doing what he thought was right. I don't know if my reasons for acting matter less than the results of my actions. I don't know if choosing dignity over security is always the right choice, or if it just happened to be the right choice in a situation I couldn't have predicted. What I do know is this: Emma's safe, Blackwood's in prison, and the next time I see someone being treated as less than human, I'll speak up again, not because I expect to save the world, but because staying silent feels like betraying everyone who's ever been made to feel small by someone with power. Maybe that's enough. Maybe that's all any of us can do. So I guess my question for you is this: how do we create a world where protecting each other doesn't require heroism, where it's just the baseline of how we treat one another? And when you're faced with a choice between your security and someone else's dignity, what do you choose? Does it matter if you make the right choice for the wrong reasons, or the wrong choice for the right ones? Because I'm still figuring that out, and I suspect I always will be.